I'm not sure where this project started, but as I think back, it seems that it was a combination of dozens of little things that led me here. There was the offhand remark from my friend Brad a couple of years ago who, as I was lamenting the lack of space I had to plant cool new trees, said, "I see a lot of grass by your vegetable garden." There was also the semi-circular planting of crab apples that my friend Heather did in her Chicago area garden last year. 2 or 3 years ago, I started thinking that the tough stuff hydrangeas, which are some of my favorites, were turning out to be just too tall for the spot I had them growing in. Where would I move them to? And then there was the repeated question that showed up time after time in video comments. Why don't you have any water features in your garden? I didn't think I was a fountain person. That is until I found a fountain that spoke to me. All of these things came together in my brain last year when I started cooking up the idea of this new garden area. A garden extension that I thought was antithetical to what the future of this garden was supposed to be. The plan has not been to make more garden spaces. There's already a huge garden here, more than I properly take care of, and more than any future owner will likely be interested in. But somewhere along the line, this new garden became a total no-brainer. At every step of the way, things fell naturally into place. I know I'm headed in the right direction on a garden design when nothing feels forced, and that's how this project came together. But before we look at the final result, let's put some finishing touches on this design. So if you've been following along with this project from the beginning, from way back in spring when I sort of introduced this project and told you a little bit more about the vision and why this was happening, then we rolled into the planting, the perennial planting, the tree and shrub planting, and then installing the centerpiece of this, which is the fountain. Since then, it's just been little finishing touches on this to kind of wrap this project up and put a little bow on it. And that started with just a little bit more planting. So here's me to tell you about that. So one of the things that I noticed almost as soon as we got the fountain in there was that the base I had built for it was visually bigger than I had anticipated it would be. I just expected there to be less around it, which is fine. I'm happy with how it turned out. But it did make me realize that there is an opportunity for some planting in there. So of course I ran out right away and ordered some plants. I got 5 of the creeping red thyme. Now this is a super hardy creeping thyme. This one is hardy down to zone 3. And then I got 3 of the Orium golden, well, something. I don't know what the next word of that is. Sedums. Now the sedums I'm going to put actually in the ground, kind of tucked up in the rocks, because there's a few little holes in my little rock wall there. So I'm going to tuck those in the bottom. But these the thyme is actually going to go into the gravel. Now, I don't know how well this is going to work. My experience of planting creeping thyme as any kind of ground cover is pretty terrible. I have killed a lot of creeping thyme in my life. However, usually I've been using that in a path where it's being walked on. I do not think this likes being walked on at all. So I'm hoping that if I can get enough of a pocket of soil in that gravel to actually put these in there and find just a few little spots to kind of sneak one in, that it'll be okay. But if it doesn't work, I guess I wouldn't be surprised about that either. Okay, so I stuck the 3 sedums just on this side. This is the most visible side. If it works, I can always divide them and put them around the other side. And then I put the thyme basically more or less evenly spaced, just to soften and fill those gaps a little bit. I think could be very pretty. That planting was all done 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and I am pleasantly surprised with how things are looking. Like I said, I have not had a lot of luck with these ground cover thymes in the past, but this guy is definitely grown. This one over here is looking great. This one over here is a little bit smaller, but still hanging in there. This guy just has a lot of pine needles on it, basically. But that one's looking pretty good. And then as far as the sedums go, one of them seemed to have been ripped up. I don't know what that's about. This one is kind of small, but this one seems to have taken quite well. So I actually may introduce some more sedums around the edges here, but we'll wait and see how this goes. But I'm pretty happy with how those turned out. I did have one of the treasure trove Rebecca's planted right here next to the standalone Tough Stuff hydrangea on this side of the path. I moved that actually back over to here because it seemed to me like it made more sense continuing along this line. So I actually put that guy right there. The Amsonia is draped on it a little bit right now, but that way we're ending with the treasure trove. Here's another Tough Stuff, and then we, come around the whole way here. I also added in a few more geraniums. This is another geranium sanguineum, which is the same species as Max Frey, but this one is called Purple Glow. I couldn't find any more Max Frey, but it does have an awfully pretty flower on it here. This gets a little bit taller than Max Frey, so my thought is that will fill in this hole pretty well. I also have put in a few little shrubby things. Now these are not hardy in my zone, so while I will try to overwinter them, that would be a gift. But they're beautiful. These are beautiful abelias. This is peach something abelia. Great, super helpful of me to tell you that. And then I also have some distiliums, which I've sort of dotted up here, and that is a great plant that would be very unlikely if it overwinters for me. I actually got these to use these in containers and ended up not using them in containers, so I put them here. Beautiful. I'm envious of those of you who can grow this. This is cast in bronze distilium. And then with the planting fish, it was just about making these beds really neat. So I did go through and refined the edge, made a really nice edge along these two beds, and I really need to continue that, cutting that edge in. It's been there for a long time farther down the line, but I should redo it because they always look so nice and crisp. And then I came in and I mulched everything. And I went with pine straw mulch again in this bed. I did that because I was really happy with using it last year in a lot of places in the garden. And I do feel like it's helping with my jumping worm situation. One of the reasons I switched to pine straw mulch is that it is not favored by jumping worms. So while it doesn't decrease your population of jumping worms, you also aren't providing a food source for them. I also happen to really love the look of pine straw mulch, and I am so envious of those of you in the South who, have this everywhere and have easy access to it. I still have to order mine. I'm hopeful that some garden centers here will start carrying it. I ordered mine from the same place I've gotten it in the past, and it's not cheap. It's not cheap to do it that way. I totally get it. I also think it was worth the investment. It did work out quite well for me in the areas where it was thick enough. It is a bit of a bummer to pick weeds out of it where it's not thick enough and they actually have a chance to grow. Where it is thick enough, boy, it is an incredibly effective mulch and really did not break down really at all, which is great because I'd like to get a few years out of my mulch. But the whole area I think looks really, really nice with the mulch. Now I've had a few questions about the path material here. All the paths on this side of the garden are made from arborist wood chips, which are just the free wood chips you get. We usually keep our own from when we have trees cut down. I actually ran out this year, so things were getting a little thin over here, so I did buy the cheapest bagged mulch I could find, and did throw a little bit on the path just from the bridge down to here just to neaten this up, because it had gotten thin enough that I was starting to have some weed issues here. Those arborist chips, though, break down into the nicest soil amendment. So a really good way to deal with them, if you have the time to deal with this, is when that path breaks down, is to put some of that, you shovel that out and put some of that in the bed, and then put your new wood chips on top. Since I ran out this year, and I didn't want to go get another load of arborist wood chips, because you know they come in enormous quantities, and I was not in the mood for like moving around a lot of arborist wood chips. So it was just easier to just top things up with a little bit of cedar mulch of whatever was cheap at the hardware store, basically. I also did a bit of refining on the electrical situation with the fountain. So let me show you what we did over there. I did enclose the wires that are coming out of the fountain for both the lights and the fountain, just the cords, I should say, in just a tiny little 1/2-inch flexible cord thing, which is just buried underneath there, and it pops out under here. You can see it a little bit right there, and then it goes just underneath the mulch over to here. Now let's talk a little bit about this box here. The right way to hook up a fountain is to have a GFCI outlet close enough to your fountain that you plug directly into it, and we will do that at some point. We will get the power over here from the outlet that I have over by the gate. We will do that and get a proper outlet here. So for the time being, we have the same setup where I'm using a really heavy duty extension cord. I did not put the extension cord in conduit, as I mentioned I might in the first video. One of the things I learned is that extension cords need to be able to regulate heat, and if you put them in conduit, they can overheat, and that can obviously lead to problems. I should mention, by the way, that that outlet that is over by the gate that we are plugged into right now is a GFIC outlet, so we're all good there. And then what I've done is this. I've put all the connections in this box right here, which is watertight. There's watertight areas for the cords going on each side. So everything is protected from water there. This is the controller for the lights. So that is actually, I've got that set on a photosensitivity, so it needs to be outside. So, and it didn't fit in the box, so that's fine. But for now, everything is in this watertight box, so those connections are good. And in the future, we will get an outlet put in over here and just bring that power over here. You might also notice this tube right here, which we installed right here. I haven't fully buried it because we're gonna connect it a little bit kind of permanently here. This is the drain for the fountain, and the water was running pretty orange. I mean, everything in there was not clear like you see now, and that is pretty common with Corten steel. We hooked up that tube, which just goes downhill over here over to our little creek, so that we could drain the fountain, because the water was really quite orange, which is exactly what happens with sort of new Corten steel. So the whole idea of Corten steel is that it ages and weathers beautifully. But once it's exposed to the elements, and especially with something that is holding water, it tends to age very rapidly. And what happens is a lot of rust, I think that's what we're calling it, whatever, patina, develops very quickly, and so it's kind of sloughs off. So the water had gotten like fully orange inside of it. So basically we let it run for maybe 2 weeks, and then we did a big refresh, and now we're running free and clear. I also used a product that was recommended by John at Quartz and Decor, where I got the fountain from. And I'll put it up on the screen. It's called Everbright. It's a sealant. And I did spray that on the inside of the fountain before we installed it, because we don't need the inside of the fountain to age. We want the outside to age, but we don't need the inside to age. And then when I changed out the water, I also actually gave this top tray a little bit of scrubbing, because it was getting like raised, kind of like raised bumps of rusty bits. So I just gave it a good scrubbing. It comes right off. Gave it a good scrubbing, and then hit that with some of that Everbright sealant, which now it looks really nice. So it's still patinaed and it's aged nicely, but that kind of, I think, stops the patinaing. So on that top tray, that way we shouldn't have any more sort of sloughing off of deposits from there. So one of the questions that has come up quite a bit is, why did you put the fountain way out here by the road instead of, by your patio where you could enjoy it? Or the other one is, are you going to put some sort of seating area out here? And I did talk about this a little bit in the introductory design video, but it's been asked often enough that I think it's worthy of a more in-depth answer. And there's a lot of reasons why I put this fountain here, and these are in no particular order of importance. And the first one is that I didn't just place this fountain willy-nilly in this particular spot. You can actually see this fountain from most places in the yard. And the next reason kind of goes along with two kind of handy garden design concepts. The first one is the idea of intrigue. If you remember, when I first introduced this project, I talked a little bit about how this is going to grow into a little bit of a wall here. These crab apples will, obviously they're going to grow up, they're going to thick up, they're going to create a bit of a wall here. The tough stuff hydrangeas are going to get quite a bit taller, because remember how tall they were when I moved them over here and then I actually cut them. So they're going to get quite tall. So this is going to be very much obscured during the summer, not so much obviously during winter, but during summer this is going to be basically a wall. There will be little opportunities to peek in here, and while you're peeking in here from outside, you will possibly see the fountain, but you will definitely hear the fountain. Now listen, I create my garden primarily for myself and the people who are at my house, but there is something cool about designing a garden that makes people want to see what lies beyond. The idea of intrigue and obscuring views to create that intrigue and mystery is something that carries you throughout a garden. And that's kind of the other thing. This fountain is located at sort of the end, this kind of corner of the garden. And seeing it and hearing it from other parts of the garden draws you in over here. So not only is it creating intrigue and interest for passersby, it is also creating intrigue and interest in other spots of the garden. It's also part of the reason why I raised it up a little bit, because the spot where I'm standing is one of the higher parts of the garden. I can look around over the top of a good part of the garden that kind of goes this direction. So you can see this from every part of this side of the house. But there's something to be said for enjoying a beautiful water feature, and the sound of a water feature is obviously one of its main draws. The point that many people had was, don't you want to listen to that while you enjoy sitting on your patio or on your deck? The thing about sitting on our patio and deck, and you wouldn't know this unless you were there, is that we already have a water feature over there. Now, it's not a water feature that we can easily see at all times of the year, but it is definitely one that you can hear when you're sitting anywhere on that side of the house. That water feature is Lake Michigan. Because we're only a few hundred feet from Lake Michigan, we can hear the waves lapping on the shore. We can hear the seagulls who fly over it. We're close enough that we get to enjoy all parts of Lake Michigan, except for the part where we get to have a clear view of it, because we aren't right along the lake. We've got neighbors between us and the lake. But we do hear every part of it. And that's obviously something that's very important to us. It's one of the reasons we love the location of our house, is because even though we can't necessarily see a good view of Lake Michigan, we can experience it and hear it every single day. And there's one final reason, and this is sort of the lazy gardener in me reason, which is that part of the house, the part over by the patio and everything, that area is, I'm pretty satisfied with how everything looks over there. I mean, we got a large redesign over there in 2011. Redesign, or actually created much of that garden in 2011. I'm very happy with pretty much everything that's going on over there. And to bring in a water feature like this into an existing garden would require a fairly significant redesign. And I didn't think there was any need to do that. So what's the future for this garden? What's left to do? Well, the part of the garden over by the fountain is, for all intents and purposes, done. That is, the planting is you know, with the exception of a little bit of tweaking, depending on if we lose something or I don't like something, that planting is pretty much finished. There is a good amount of space over in this part of the garden though for future planting, which I'm really happy about because I am a huge plant nerd. I love trying out new plants. I love getting new plants. I love experimenting with plants. And this gives me some opportunity to do that and to see how this garden performs and what I want to do over here. So there's obviously like a significant amount of space through here. There's a little bit along the edge here. And obviously I've put in some shrubs that, like I mentioned, are not going to be hardy here. So we've got an opportunity there. I might decide to change some things around. So anyway, I've got a lot of planting, not a lot. I have some planting opportunity over here, which will tide me over for future years when I want to be doing something in my garden and changing something up, but I don't need to be taking on more projects and creating more garden spaces because I need to concentrate on making the garden spaces that I already have the best they can be. The other thing that's going to happen over here is that we're going to need to work on tying it in with the existing garden that's over here. So this garden, obviously, that starts right here, has been the existing sort of shady border that honestly has not gotten the attention it deserves over the years. I've made a few changes to it this year. I've talked just briefly about a couple of them, but we can go into more later. But this whole area is just like begging for amazing garden space over here. It is really pretty shady, although it's high shade now, which has helped. We've got bright light that comes through here. So that's the other thing that can happen is we're gonna, you know, work this bed in, and creating this is kind of the impetus for me to tackle this, which is a bit of a mess, to be honest. I mean, there is some really good stuff in there, but unfortunately there's always a little bit of bad stuff in there, and you know how this goes, the bad stuff kind of takes over. I think what I see for the future is working on developing this bed, which isn't huge, but working on developing this bed a little bit, and that's going to flow into what's happening over here, and naturally I'll want to sort of get this a little bit more orderly and then make this all a very cohesive space. So I knew I would like this garden when I was designing it, and with this idea I knew I would enjoy this space. I did not expect to love it as much as I do. As this garden started coming together, it became clear to me that this was what this space was missing. You know, when this garden ended right over here, it just kind of stopped. There was no punctuation, there was no period on the garden. There was just a garden that just kind of flowed into grass and then went out to the vegetable garden. But by creating this space that has become a destination onto its own, a pleasurable place to be, but also has created, you know, a barrier. This wall, I think, it has really created a barrier that says, okay, the garden stops here. And the garden is going to stop here, by the way, because I'm not going to keep going this way. We're not making more garden spaces. That is a note to me as much as it is to you. So I took on two pretty big garden projects this year, which is at least one too many. But one of them was this garden, and then the other one was putting in a deer fence. And interestingly, the main thing that I'm finding that what both of them bring is something I wasn't expecting and I didn't realize I wanted: a sense of enclosure. And I truly do mean a sense of enclosure, because every part of the deer fence is see-through. There is no solid fencing anywhere. But there is sort of I know it's there, and you do see it a little bit. And there is a sense of enclosure with that. There's also the sense of enclosure that we're getting from, you know, at least I can see it in my mind's eye, but it's here a little bit for what you can see with these, is going to happen with these crab apples here. And for a long time, I didn't like the idea of closing off the garden because I wanted the garden to feel friendly, and somehow in my mind, I felt like enclosing the space sends a message of, don't come here, we don't want you here. But what I found is that as the person who enjoys this garden, there is something cozy about it to create a sense of enclosure in a garden. So I hope you enjoyed following along for the entire build of this project. One of the reasons I wanted to do a series of videos on this is that I thought that the space that I was doing here was a pretty manageable and maybe even average, size of space to develop a new garden in. And so even though this is, adjacent to an existing garden, this whole space was brand new. This was, virgin ground that was just grass before. So I'm hoping if you're developing a new space that you found following along with this series helpful. But also I hope you take away from this that sometimes these projects take some time. I mean, not only was this cooking around in my head for a number of months, I started drawing this thing out in October, had to redraw it out in probably April, and here I am in August, basically finally having wrapped this up. Not every project has to be done in, the timing of a 30-minute HGTV video. Sometimes things just take a little bit of time. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoyed this project as much as I did, because it did kind of come together a little bit slowly, which allowed me to actually enjoy the process instead of rushing through the process. And at the end of the day, I'm left with a garden that I think I am more happy with right out of the gate than I have maybe been with any other garden I've ever worked on. Everything about this project felt right to me. And I'm sitting here looking at the end result, and I'm not wanting for anything. There are no notes in my head right now of, okay, well, in the future we're going to do that, or in the future we're going to do this. This is okay for now. No, I feel like this is really, really good. So thanks for following along with me on this months-long series of building a new garden. And if you want to see how this garden develops, as well as everything else that I'm up to in the garden, the best way to do that is to subscribe. It's totally free. Just hit the little subscribe button below this video. So thank you for following along with this project. I hope you enjoyed the journey as much as I did. Have a great day in your garden, and we'll see you soon. And there's one final reason, and honestly, I'm going to tell you right now, hey. Hey. What the heck?